out to Socrates. Socrates still trying to get the opening. Oh, Socrates! Whoa!
And there it is. The crazy gang have beaten the Culture Club.
Maggie Thatcher, can you hear me? Maggie Thatcher, your boys took a hell of a beating. Your boys took a hell of a beating.
Welcome to Your Boys Took a Hell of a Beating special module. The man who fronted the 1990 World Cup finals, the Euro '88 finals for ITV. Not Des Line. We're talking the other side here. I grew up in the Granada region, Merseyside as well. So this is a figure of my childhood who I've managed to trip across here. Thanks to the wonderful Gary Cook, who has done so much towards a book that Elton now has out about his career. And we are happy to bring you the wonderful Elton Welsby. Welcome, Elton, to the podcast.
Nice to join you.
Brilliant.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Along for the ride, we have Dave Bowler. Dave's West Midlands. He's West Bromwich. So his ITV regional grounding is ATV. It's Hugh Johns.
I was about to say Hugh Johns.
And Gary Newbon, indeed.
Well, you've got one legend there.
I grew up on Clive Tilsley being a Radio City commentator and Elton Welsby being on a Friday night on kickoff, doing the weekend preview and then on the highlights on a Sunday afternoon. And that's my go-to images.
That was a good grounding for you.
A great grounding. In the Granada region, Elton, we were massively spoiled. And I had conversations about not the lack of football, but the amounts of football that were on TV back in the 1980s, certainly the early 1980s. Very little in the way of live games being on. Cup final. Maybe England, Scotland, it'd be the World Cups we'd be waiting for. Maybe the occasional World Cup qualifier or a European away game for one of the English teams, the British teams. But in the Northwest, we were massively spoilt. In Liverpool, we had Radio City, who you worked for, Radio Merseyside. We'd obviously be able to do Sport on 2, on Radio 2. Match of the day on a Saturday night, click through a turnstile on a Saturday afternoon, maybe the occasional midweek game. And we had it absolutely. We were spoilt in the Northwest, Elton, and you were a huge part in that. What was it? What was it like being part of that football era?
Well, it was marvellous. I mean, I said it was a good grounding for you. It was a great grounding for me as well. I mean, starting with Radio City, who I joined in 1974, October 1974. I had 3.5 years of City where we were all green. We were all novices in the radio game. And we sort of learnt on the job. We made mistakes. We made a lot of them, but we all learnt together. The crew that was put together to lead the Radio City news and sports output from 74 onwards produced some very, very successful broadcasters as well, DJs as well as the journalists. So that was terrific. And then I took the opportunity when asked to go to Granada Television. I didn't see a microphone or a camera for 6 months. I wonder whether I've made a mistake, to be honest with you, but there was method in my boss's madness in so much that he knew where I was going way before I knew where I was going in television terms. And then, I started. I started as co-host with Gerald Sinstad, who you remember very well. Now, Gerald, after the first few weeks, I think of this, I forget exactly when it was, it would be the 1978-79 season, Gerald got Bell's palsy, and which meant he couldn't do the commentaries for 2 games. One was Bristol City against Everton, a labour of love for me, that one. And the other was Manchester United against Arsenal. And I had to commentate for television. And I was also co-hosting, by this stage, I was presenting Kickoff on my own for about 6 or 7 weeks while Gerald was recovering. And I didn't know at that point whether Paul Doherty, the boss, was steering me towards commentary or steering me towards presentation. I didn't have a clue. But he knew. He knew. Because I mean, after I'd done the second commentary game, Man United against Arsenal, I was never asked to do another one. So I got the gist. Presentation is your route, young man.
Presentation was your route. I mean, Dave, you'd have got plenty of Gerald Sinstad on Star Soccer as that kind of like airdrop. Here's a game from one of the other regions.
It was interesting because, as you say, on Star Soccer we'd have, we might have a Derby game or the Villa game or the Albion game or whatever, and then you'd get 2 or 3 games after that, sort of 5 minutes of each, and it was interesting to hear the different voices, from around the country. It was such a big thing then, with so few games being screened. It was really interesting to get to see these teams that you barely ever saw, particularly if they were picking up a 3rd division game or a 4th division game, and you got something exotic like Barnsley or Tranmere or something. I mean, that was back then. That was a feast somehow.
Yeah, it was massively. I mean, Elton, the games that were selected. What was the system in picking a game that Kickoff would cover? I mean, I know.
Not a clue. Not a clue.
I have no idea how that worked out.
No, never told. I was just told we're after the kickoff on the Friday night. Right, we're all at Old Trafford or Main Road or Goodison or Anfield or wherever it happened to be on the Saturday, and then we'll have a choice of, say, 2 other games that I'd have to introduce at the ground on the Saturday night for the Sunday afternoon broadcast. And that was it. I was never asked, which game do you think we should be doing? Didn't work like that.
Didn't work like that. You had no say in the matter.
None whatsoever.
Of all those games, I mean, those early days, front of camera, did you find that suited you? Was that kind of like, was it an early thing that you thought, this is the right job?
It seemed absolutely natural to me. I don't mean to sound that big in a big-headed way at all. It just felt comfortable and natural. The other thing that I was encouraged not to use in the early days, and I never did, and that was the autocue. I used to write a basic script. I worked around that, ad-libbed when necessary, but I wasn't stuck with the autocue, having to read what was going up and down in front of the camera lens. I didn't like that because I thought it steered you away from spontaneity.
Yeah, totally get that. I mean, in terms of the commentators Granada had as well, there was an amazing string of them, from Barry Davis, Gerald Sinstad, to Martin Tyler, to Clive Tilsley, Rob Palmer as well later on.
Well, Barry was before my time at Granada. Gerald Sinstad had been doing it for quite a few years when I joined Granada Television. And then when Gerald left, I think it was late 81, 82, something like that. Martin Tyler was poached from Yorkshire Television, and he did it for a long, long time. And then, as you say, Clive Tilsley and Rob Palmer. I think that was probably the end of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's the way it went. It felt for me. But I mean, moving onwards, I mean, it didn't hold you back, that kind of ebbing away of the regionalised, coverage of the game, which would come back actually in the late 80s when ITV got that exclusive deal for the last 4 years of the old First Division. But soon kind of like the opportunity came to do it nationally, Elton.
Yes, well, that started in 86 when World of Sport was no more. But ITV decided on a Saturday afternoon they'd retain 2 segments of the World of Sport slot, the St. and Greavesy show and the results. St. and Greavesy is self-explanatory. That went out lunchtime-ish from the London Weekend Television Studios. And the results service, which I presented from 4:45 until 5, went out from the same studios as the St. and Greavesy. Yeah,
I remember those days very well. Dave, Elton would soon become a familiar face across the second half of the 1980s for not just us in the Northwest, but on screens all over the UK.
For younger listeners, as they say, it's difficult to quite understand how important that results show was, because you'd perhaps got I think the sport was on Radio 2, wasn't it? And you got your regional radio stations and whatnot. But you didn't really have much of a picture of what was going on a Saturday afternoon at the other grounds, other than where you were or what your team was particularly. So, sort of 4:45 or 20:05, whatever it was on a Saturday afternoon when we all sat down. I mean, that was what they call appointment television, wasn't it? We all had to be there, and you probably got your newspaper from the Saturday, but you got all the fixtures in, and you wrote down the scores as they were coming in, so that you could talk about them that night. It seems like a very different world to what we've got now, because now you can't avoid what the scores are.
The ratings, Dave, for the results service, in television terms, the ratings, the all-important rating, were absolutely excellent. It's, around about 7, 8 million. On a Saturday afternoon at 4:45, used to absolutely obliterate grandstands figures at that time, because they were doing other things in the afternoon. All we had to do from 3 o'clock onwards was concentrate on what was happening in the football, and then put that all together into a quarter of an hour segment. And from start to finish, you knew exactly what had happened pretty much everywhere, not just the First Division, but everywhere in football that afternoon. And it was a specialist thing to do. Very, very nerve-wracking to start with, I have to tell you, because there was no script, there was no basic running order. It was, when a report was ready, go to it. If not, wait. Went to the classifieds whenever it was seat of your pants TV, that's for sure. But so enjoyable, exhilarating, to be honest with you, to be sat in front of that program, where the producer, the director, the presenter, myself, didn't know where we were going from one moment to the next.
Fantastic. I mean, a lot of this change at that point in time, Elton. I mean, there was the end of World of Sport, but also Brian Moore, after the 1986 World Cup, took he halved his workload, didn't he? Because ITV network football was so synonymous with Brian Moore being front of camera and then rushing off to be behind the microphone a lot of the time for the games as well.
That was the big match, the Sunday afternoon offering from London Weekend Television, which was their equivalent of, the kickoff match. I don't know what it was called in the Midlands, Dave. I do apologise. I don't know what it was called in the Northeast or Yorkshire. I don't know the title of the programmes, but I know that Moro's programme, where, as you say, he presented and then introduced his own commentary, as it were. That was the big match.
That's right. I mean, the move away from the regionalised stuff, because we had a bit of Jim Rosenthal fronting, Sunday afternoon games on ITV as well for a little bit. But you started to do that a lot more, from 1986 onwards.
The contract, the snatch of the day, was in 88 and lasted for 4 years. And I presented every one of those programmes. I don't know if you're saying that Jim presented a few. That was before the exclusivity kicked in. Yeah. It must have been a sort of a highlights package, or I can't remember what ITV were doing back then, to be honest with you, apart from the midweek stuff, because as you'll know, we had a program called Granada Soccer Night, which was predominantly on Wednesday evenings, Wednesday night, should I say, 10:30 start, right after news at 10. And we used to do highlights, from the First Division, the Second, Third and Fourth Divisions. Admittedly, in the Fourth Division, we'd have just the goal highlights of a game played that night. But a thoroughly comprehensive football programme, which was, and it's remembered very fondly to this day, I can tell you. There's never been, since Granada stopped doing regional programmes, there's never been another football programme, whether it be locally or nationally, to compare with Granada Soccer Night. It was revolutionary in its time, It
was. The coverage was absolutely amazing. Occasionally we'd have opt-ins for midweek sports special. So we get used to seeing you on a Sunday afternoon, Elton, and Nick Owen sometimes.
Yeah, Nick, yeah.
But the two of you teamed up for Euro 88 and the 1990 World Cup?
Euro 88, I didn't do any presenting at all, because I wanted to go with my mate, Big Jack Charlton, and the Republic of Ireland. But I took over presentation, well, co-presented the Italia 90, but I did all the presentation from the grounds, and Nick was the host in London. But as the tournament progressed and as we got better and the technical side of it, which was very, very difficult back then, believe me, to go live from a stadium in Rome, Turin, Naples, Palermo, wherever, and introduce the games and talk about the games at halftime and full time live, as opposed to a comfy little studio in London, it was very difficult. But we got better and better and better at it, to such an extent that the coverage from London, the studio content from London, decreased as the tournament progressed. I remember wrapping up the entire Italia 90 from on ITV's behalf from Rome, and saying "Arrivederci Roma," because it was they didn't even go to London to say goodbye, because our coverage of big. I said once again, it was revolutionary. It had never been done before. Never been done before.
Elton has a huge point there. A lot of the coverage that ITV had at that World Cup, that split between studio and stadium, it's now kind of like ingrained within football coverage, not just in this country, but across the world, really.
Oh, very much, yeah, very much so. I mean, it's all to do with technology. The engineers, the technical boffins at ITV, they were quite frightened and intimidated by what the editorial people said that they were going to try and do, which was live presentation from the stadia in Italy. And the technical people, they went out on recce's and they also till they, got it right to get it right. And we did have a problem. The very first one we did, which was from the, where was that from? Oh, I forget which stadium it was. And I was with Trevor Francis. And you know what is a count, where you count it into a piece of videotape which had been recorded earlier. And I was crashing the tape. In other words, 10, 9, 8, 7, right through 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the tape had been coming in when I was on 3. And I got a sort of a mild rebuke from the London end that I kept crashing tapes. And our PA, Gene Doherty, worked out that there was a time delay. Now, no one in all the recce's, all the rehearsals, this had never manifested itself before, that there was a time delay. So I had to have 2 counts to one of these clips, one from London, which was picked up by the PA outside the ground in Italy, and she would subtract the necessary amount, and then she would give me an alternative count. That took a bit of getting used to. Believe me, that took a bit of getting used to, but it just became the norm and became expected, really.
It sounds an absolute set of plate spinning going on there.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. But again, it worked. Otherwise, I mean, one of the first things I heard down my ear outside prior to the very first game of Italia 90, which was covering Argentina against Cameroon, and I heard someone say, well, if this doesn't work, we'll just do it all from London. I thought, oh, great. Thanks. Got real confidence in what we were trying to do. But anyway, it did work. Thankfully, it worked. One or two teething problems early doors, as I've just outlined, but it worked. 2 years later, we did everything from Sweden for the European Championships. We cracked it by then. It was almost like Italia 90 was a test event for the Euros in 92. Because we didn't have a London studio in 92. Everything came from the grounds in Sweden.
I can't tell you the respect I have for people like Elton and all the commentators and all the presenters. I mean, on a minor, minuscule, tiny level, when I was at the Albion, I used to do some of the co-commentating, and you're sitting in a press box with your ISDN box, hoping that everything will plug in, hoping that you'll be able to dial in and then everything's going to work, and having that cold sweat go down your back when it doesn't work. And I'd got 3 people and a dog listening to me, so it didn't matter. If you're broadcasting to the entire nation, before a big England game at a World Cup or a European Championships or whatever it is. I don't know how you get through that without a very large bottle of strong drink, frankly.
No, never resort to that, I assure you. Because if you did, say, took a glass of brandy or something before you went on air and you made a mistake and someone spoke to you and they could smell alcohol on your breath, they'd say, oh, well, he was pissed, that's why he made that mistake. Never, ever, never, ever do that. Never fall into that trap.
I mean, Elton, across all those years, Radio City to Granada to ITV Network, football wise, you covered some incredible events and some fantastic eras for some amazing football teams, and a great time to cover Merseyside as well.
Well, yes. I'm an Evertonian. I don't know whether you've mentioned that, or I don't think you did in your build-up. But from 1974 to when I left, early '78, that's Radio City. As an Evertonian, I was known as the voice of Anfield because I worked so closely with Liverpool, commentated on all their games at home and abroad, became very, very good friends with Bob Paisley and the team. And I just carried that on, really, in Granada, using those contacts and all the people I got to know during my time at Radio City. One thing led to the other, really.
And it was no secret that you were such a huge, Everton fan. But what was always just so thoroughly fantastic was just how even-handed you were with every team that you covered. There never, whereas nowadays you can see, a hint of bias is allowed within presenters and commentators. But, you just embraced all, Elton.
I was doing a derby game at Goodison, and the guest was Ron Atkinson. And Liverpool had been on a long winning run, and they had to beat Everton to sort of set a record of consecutive First Division wins. And I actually let my guard down just for a split second. I said to Big Ron, well, as a Merseysider, Ron, with more blue blood than red, and then asked him a question. That was the only time I alluded to the fact that I was an Everton fan and had been since 1962. I mean,
Elton, your footballing heroes, like I'd love to touch on that. The players that as a supporter, enjoyed watching. And the players as a journalist, as a presenter, that you enjoyed spending time with, that you got the best rapport from?
Well, let's start with the players that influenced me, I suppose, way back in the early 60s when I first started to watch Everton, were Alex Young, Roy Vernon, those are front two, as it were, in those days. Fabulous combination of players. You never see the likes of Alex Young ever again, I don't think. And then, of course, the 1970 team. I was working in newspapers just about the time we won the title in 1970 with that midfield trio of Kendall, Ball and Harvey, who were telepathic. They really were. They were uncanny. And I actually do believe that Sir Alf Ramsey missed a trick in the World Cup in 1970. Despite the success 4 years earlier, I really do believe the midfield in 1970 should have been Kendall, Ball and Harvey, and then play everyone else around them. The Bobby Charltons of this world, the Jeff Hurst. Play all those around Kendall, Ball and Harvey. Whether we'd have beaten the Brazil side of 70, I'm not so sure. But I'll tell you something, we wouldn't have lost to Germany.
I think it's a fantastic shout there, Dave. Dave, you've got a lot of time for that 1970 World Cup. It's your first World Cup, isn't it? Really, that you remember?
It is, yeah. I mean, that was an amazing World Cup. That midfield that Everton had at that point. I mean, I think that's always the thing with England. It's, do you pick the, in inverted commas, the best players, or do you pick a bunch of players who've played together for years, understand one another completely, and everything is natural and instinctive to them, and work around that. I think Ron Greenwood tried to do that, didn't he, with the Liverpool team when he first took over after Don Revie. I think he played about 7 Liverpool players in one of his early games. It's it's one of those points that you'll never get an answer to. But I think Elton's got a fair point in saying those three should have played. And the number of caps, Colin Harvey 1 cap and Edward Kendall no caps at all. It's bewildering.
Totally is. I mean, Elton, as a journalist, a presenter, who your favourite interviewees? Who did you have that rapport with that you thought you go into an interview with and think this is just going to be a fine 5-10 minutes that is going to go out on kickoff?
I think the easy answer to that question is to tell you the one person I didn't have any kind of rapport with at all, because I had a decent relationship with all of them. But one guy I just couldn't. I don't know. We just didn't have any kind of chemistry whatsoever. We didn't gel, and that was Malcolm Allison. Don't ask me why, because his best mate was my boss. Maybe that had some underlying reason behind it. I've no idea. But first time I went to interview Malcolm, I could see he just looked, I'm not going to answer you. I'm not going to do you any favours. That was the look in his eye, And sure enough, he never did. And I probably interviewed him, I don't know, a dozen or so times, and always the same result. How did the interview go, Elt? Crap. Just didn't enjoy his company at all. Just nothing. Nothing going for it at all, Elton. Yeah. Well, I mean, he wasn't all he was cracked up to be, that's for sure. I mean, for example, Alan Oakes was manager of Chester. I don't know whether you recall that, Alan, the former Manchester City midfielder in the great City team that won the title in '68. And Oakes rang up Allison and said, "We've got a kid here." He said, you really want to take a look at him. He's going to go all the way. And Allison said, apparently, I heard this secondhand, but I can well believe it. He just said, well, if I get the time, I will do it. I'll see it. And he never did. Oh, by the way, the kid's name was Ian Rush.
Yeah, I can totally
if I've got the time.
If I've got the time to go and see him.
Bob Paisley did.
But Paisley did, yeah. It's like the Decca turning down the Beatles.
Correct.
We've had other conversations about Malcolm Allison in the course of this series, so you're not alone there, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Elton, you've got a book out. Tell us about the book. It's called Game for a Laugh. You've worked on it with Gary Cook.
Yes,
he was kind enough to point us in your direction to come on as a guest.
Well, it was a long time in the making, about 10 months, and we worked together closely on it. Gary wrote the majority. I wrote quite a bit of the funny stories that basically only I could tell and only I could relate to, and then it all came together and it's proved to be very, very successful. It's my career, but it highlights some of the great characters and personalities that I worked with down the years. The likes of Bill Shankly, Bob Paisley, Bran Clough, Big Jack Charlton, and many, 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 many more.
Yeah, I mean, it's a litany of the biggest names in football there, Dave, that Elton's worked with and plotted a path with. I mean, I'd throw in there as well, you're working at Granada at the time that Bill Shankly, sadly passes. And there's that amazing, I think it's still available on YouTube.
Yes. It is.
Went out that night with Harry Catterick involved as well. You've overseen some incredible moments. And are there any particular standout ones that always that come to you on a I don't know, kind of like a sunny Wednesday afternoon?
Very, very sunny here. I would have to say the outstanding occasion that I presented was undoubtedly in 1989, when Arsenal went to Anfield needing to win by 2 clear goals to win the championship. Impossible. It could never happen. Liverpool hadn't been beaten since New Year's Day, but the impossible happened. And Arsenal won by 2-0 to win the championship. I mean, that was just an incredible account. The greatest ever finish to I'll call it a top flight season.
Yeah,
You know, because people like to say when Manchester City first won it with the Aguero goal, you know, that was a better finish, a better conclusion to the season than Arsenal winning 2-0 at Liverpool. Those who think that really are deluded.
They are.
Nothing will ever eclipse the top two going head to head for the league championship. Never be beaten. That
It was something else. Even though I was on the heartbreaking side of that night. I was in at Anfield that night for that one, but it was a stunning one. Now I can look back at what 3.5 decades or whatever it's been since, and look at that it took a good 3 decades for me to get over it, Elton.
You know, I say that and people say, oh, but you're only saying that because you're an Evertonian. That's absolute rubbish. That really is rubbish. That was history in the making, you know, and I was there. I could almost say I was a part of it, of his footballing history. I was a part of it. So, you know, that will always be, I suppose, my fondest memory from a professional standpoint. You understand?
I mean, any stories in the book that you can you can give us a sneak over to tempt a few of our listeners to buy?
And you like? They normally involve great characters. So you ask me.
Jack Charlton's on the cover of the book.
Big Jack.
You mentioned your admiration, your enjoyment of Jack Charlton.
Yeah, well, we became really good pals after the Euros in '88. We didn't just work on TV. We did stage work together, theatres, and you know, gentlemen's evenings at golf clubs and things like that. We worked all over the country together. I'll never forget. There was one occasion. It was in Sweden in '92. And we'd been entertained with this was not like work, was it? We're on a beach having a barbecue, and you know, with Brian King or Brian West. He used to be a goalkeeper for Coventry, and he was our Mr. Fix-It in Sweden, and he'd arranged this lavish do on a beach near Gothenburg. And I got the taste. I fancied a night out, and a couple of Kingy's mates said, you know, we've got a party back at our place. Do you fancy coming? I said, yeah, fine. Jack, we fancy. He said, no, I'm going to bed. I'm tired. So I went. Ended up waking up in a garden, a strange garden in Sweden, on a hammock at about 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm thinking, well, I better get back to the hotel, which was on the banks of a river. And so I got a taxi back to the hotel. I got out of the taxi, and there was Jack walking up and down the river like that. I was like, are they biting, Jack? Thinking he was looking at the fish. He said, I'm fucking looking for you. I thought you're fucking falling in.
Oh, fantastic.
But we got on great. Jack was an absolute star. And of course, I couldn't go and say my farewells when he passed away because it was during COVID.
Yeah. What a character Jack Charlton was. Front of the camera, 90 World Cup, 92 European Championships, you know, all those league games as well. You know, Bran Clough was another one that you worked with quite extensively over those years.
Oh, very much so. I mean, there was a game that we did at Derby, and Cloughie was the baseball ground, the old Derby Stadium, and Cloughie was the studio guest. It was Derby against Spurs. The Spurs side of Gary Lineker, Derby with Shilton in goal. And prior to the game, our executive producer, Dave will know, Jeff Farmer, who was a director at West Brom for a while. Yeah, and they got a call from Cloughie's mate saying, "Oh, Brian Clough." This was only about, I'd say, an hour and a half, an hour 45 minutes before kickoff, or before the program started. Said, "Well, Brian can't make it." Well, we promote this, you know, our studio guest going to be Brian Clough back at his old stomping ground, and basically, Trevor, he said to his mate, "Listen, I know the reason Brian's not coming, and we will tell the press why Brian is not coming." In other words, he'd had a few. So anyway, Cloughie turned up, and he came and sat by me about a quarter of an hour to going on air, and I'm just going through the lines that I was planning to say, and introducing Brian, and he said, "Hey, you young man, you make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung, and every time I feel." And we started singing this Frank Sinatra number, "You Make Me Feel So Young." Join in. So I had to join it with 30 seconds to going on air. Clough and I singing a duet. And that's absolutely true. I mean, you never knew what to expect with Cloughy. That was the thing. But of all the TV people back in the day, I mean, I think Brian Moore would be one. And I was probably the other who came out unscathed because he could cut you in half with his tongue.
Yeah.
But I never, ever had a problem with Cloughy.
Fantastic. Elton, it's been a joy to have you on as a guest for the podcast. Your book's out there. Listeners, please go out and buy it. Elton, a huge part of my youth via Radio City, Kickoff, and nationally on ITV. For me, every World Cup beyond 1990 has been progressively worse. And I think it's we're all hardwired to the football of our youth, and Elton, like Des Lynam on the other side, and Barry Davis and John Mott and Brian Moore, Alan Parry. I'll throw Alan Parry in there. I always had great, Martin Tyler. These you're all the names that I associate to football, and nowadays when I'm hearing commentators and I can't differentiate between one and another unless
I'm very pleased to have been part of the shape of your youth.
You definitely were, Elton, and it's been a delight to talk to you. Dave, it's been an education, hasn't it?
It has. It's been an absolute pleasure. I mean this as a compliment. It represents an age where it wasn't all serious. I'm sure obviously everybody took all their work seriously, but they didn't take themselves seriously, and the game as seriously as they do today. And that era was a joy. It was all it was all fun. It was all stuff that's memorable. And I think we've, as a game and as TV and as the whole thing, I think we've lost that, and I think we need to get it back to make football the joy that it used to be. Yeah,
without doubt. I mean, Elton, your era had the common touch that I think it lacks. Has lacked ever.
I just say I thoroughly enjoyed what I did when I did it.
I think. Do you know what? I think that's what you could tell. That generation, ITV with the Satan Greaves and everything involved as well. It was always underpinned by the fact that the knowledge that those that were presenting and those that were doing the analysis was always there as well. But there was always a little bit of a glint in the eye that a joke could always be somewhere nearby.
If there was humour to be found, we'd find it. But there's a difference between going looking for it and for it to present itself naturally. We never went looking for funny lines or whatever. They were just obvious if they were there to be had.
It was a natural thing, yeah, and that's why we always love. We love it now because we do a series of podcasts called Football Revisited, and we're rewatching a lot of big match coverage, and YouTube's great for kind of like just how much coverage it has of the kickoff match from Sunday afternoons. And Dave's region, ATV and Star Soccer. Dave, you've got that a story about fishing tapes out of a skip. It became Central, didn't it? After it was ATV when they all changed, and at one point they were moving offices from Broad Street in Birmingham to somewhere else, and loads and loads of videotapes were just chucked in a skip. And Mike Inman, I don't know if you know him, Elton.
I know Mike very well.
Yeah, Mike's an Albion supporter, and he gave us a call, and we went and helped him rescue a bunch of old Albion VHS tapes out of this skip on Broad Street in Birmingham. So Yes, it's a huge amount of stuff would have disappeared for good, unfortunately. At that
Mike Imran, by the way, he was responsible for all the menus that we used to play on the match. Because we always used the opening titles, and then we went to a menu where we could say, with Mike's great ability to match pictures to my words, we could sum up what you were about to see in about a minute and a half. The menu. And that was all down to Mike Inman and myself. I mean, we worked together on it, but he put it together, and his choice of pictures was absolutely first class, top class.
Wonderful stuff. Great stories, great years, Elton. Again, thank you so much for spending some time with us to talk.
Pleasure.
And your wonderful book that's out now. All that leaves me to do is to say thank you for listening, and please do join us again next time on Your Boys Took a Hell of a Beating. Thank you and goodbye.